Assassin's Creed has long experimented with its protagonists having magic-like abilities, oftentimes explored in post-launch expansions. Dawn of Ragnarok is the latest, adding to Assassin's Creed Valhalla by pivoting from Eivor to delve into the story of Havi, the Aesir who is most well known as Odin. Dawn of Ragnarok doesn't quite reach the highs found in Assassin's Creed's previous myth and legends-focused expansions, falling short in both delivering a compelling narrative and fully embracing its initial open-ended gameplay loop. However, Dawn of Ragnarok does satisfyingly evolve Valhalla's combat and navigation via a rewarding assortment of cool mythical powers.
To greet you!
Limbo for you!
In Dawn of Ragnarok, Havi travels to the realm of the dwarves to save his son from Surtur, the flaming Isu warlord of Muspelheim. Surtur has invaded with an army composed of giants from both the icy Jotunheim and fiery Muspelheim for some unknown purpose. Though Havi has no interest in learning what that purpose is, he still finds himself aiding the besieged dwarves in order to gather the necessary support to save his son.
Listen, Havi. I understand. This isn't your war. You just want your son back. But those Muspels on our doorstep, they ain't no joke. If they find us, we're dead meat.
The campaign attempts to navigate the complexities of Havi's abusive nature. So far, we've only seen a self-proclaimed god who's so self-assured that he can't find fault in any of his actions, reasoning that his mistreatment of his allies is a necessary evil for bettering Asgard and ensuring his own survival for all time, even through the events of Ragnarok and his predetermined demise. Dawn of Ragnarok sees Havi come face to face with this aspect of himself, and the Isu is regularly presented with examples of how the ends don't always justify the means. It's an intriguing hook, but not one that gets a satisfying payoff. His story just sort of ends. Instead, the final moments of the expansion explore Eivor, positing that the Viking learns a lesson that Havi could not. And that would be an interesting development if Valhalla's base campaign hadn't already concluded with a similar finale. So in the end, Dawn of Ragnarok's campaign feels a lot like the stories told in Wrath of the Druids and the Siege of Paris, and that it doesn't explore narrative concepts beyond what's already touched upon in Valhalla. It instead retreads old ground and feels a bit samey as a result. In terms of gameplay, however, Dawn of Ragnarok introduces several new ideas for Valhalla's formula, transforming how you're able to navigate its world and fight enemies within it. Early into his journey, Havi is gifted the Hugr Rip, a gauntlet that allows him to rip the Hugr, the mind and emotions of a creature's soul, from dead enemies and animals and inherit their forms and abilities. Each of the powers supports one of Assassin's Creed's core tenets: parkour, combat, and social stealth, creating engaging opportunities to experiment with how Havi can tackle a problem.
Thanks, Havi. I knew you wouldn't let us down.
Havi plays a lot like Assassin's Creed Odyssey's Cassandra, incorporating a combination of standard movements and godlike powers. If you're willing to engage with both movesets and carefully consider how to use each to your advantage, you can tear through encampments with an enjoyable ease and a fulfilling display of strength. Havi can only hold onto 2 Hugr at a time, and each ability needs to be charged before it can be used, encouraging you to be strategic in both what you choose to have access to and when you decide to utilize it. This additional consideration can lead to moments of rewarding adaptation, but it too easily limits the experience. It's annoying to get to points in the story where you need a certain power to proceed, but you don't have it equipped, forcing you to backtrack and find an enemy with the Hugr you need. It fortunately doesn't happen too often, but it occurs just enough to be noticeably irritating. The Hugr Rip isn't the only big change that Dawn of Ragnarok implements. The expansion opts for a more open-ended approach to exploration in comparison to previous Assassin's Creed games. After a prologue, Havi emerges from a cave to find himself atop a cliff, presenting the player with a breathtaking view of towering mountains, green valleys, and rolling hills. The game provides no waypoint at this moment, only loose directions to find a way to save Havi's son and, if time allows, discover the hidden hideaways of the dwarves and aid them in their fight against Surtur. That moment emulates a scene that's become increasingly familiar in games in the years following the release of 2017's The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild. Dawn of Ragnarok does initially embody those clear inspirations, kicking off with a hands-off open-world structure. You do get waypoints for your next mission once you discover a new narrative thread, but completing that thread leaves you once again devoid of any waypoint to chase after. And so in Dawn of Ragnarok's early hours, progression is solely tied to your freedom to explore and discover, a first for an Assassin's Creed game. It's refreshingly novel for the series, and there are a few interesting things to find in those early hours to keep you excited as what may hide beyond the next hill. However, Dawn of Ragnarok reverts to Assassin's Creed's traditional structure about midway through. Once the story gets going, the expansion starts regularly supplying you with waypoints, including to locations you may not have had the pleasure of discovering on your own yet. This keeps the story of the campaign moving at a nice brisk pace, but it undermines the sense of wonder and exploration the expansion cultivates in its early hours. And once that happens, the map becomes a place of interconnected destinations, not a space to explore. By the time I finished Dawn of Ragnarok, I was playing the game by climbing on my mount, telling it to follow the road to the next waypoint, and pulling out my phone to do a quick social media doom scroll while waiting for Javi to reach his destination on his own. That's a typical approach for getting around Valhalla, but a disappointing development given the initial promise of freedom the Dawn of Ragnarok's early hours provided. Dawn of Ragnarok is almost transformative for Assassin's Creed, teasing the possibility of what the series could become without the overt hand-holding that has defined it for almost 2 decades. However, after an intriguing opening, Dawn of Ragnarok falls back on old habits, and that feeling, coupled with how the expansion's narrative themes feel too similar to the base game, creates an experience that too often resembles something we've already had before. But Dawn of Ragnarok is built on the bones of a great action-adventure RPG, and that carries much of the expansion, especially with the rewarding considerations introduced with the Hugr Rip. Only time will tell if Eivor and Javi's story continues beyond Dawn of Ragnarok, but if this is the end, it's a fine enough conclusion to the relationship between the two.
On great flame! Strike with me! Earning prize! Let's stretch the neck!
Going beyond fire! Stay with me, come on!